Hello, Malcolm here, and welcome. Welcome to Tuesday Teaching Tips, episode 312. This is the latest in our series on the Beatitudes and effective communication. The lessons for preachers and teachers as to how the Beatitudes can be a helpful filter for us as we preach and teach. Today we're in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 9, so let's dig into this straight away. It reads, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." What a wonderful promise that a preacher and a teacher who preaches and teaches as a peacemaker will be called a child of God. And what will the world see if preachers and teachers preach as and teach as peacemakers? They'll see the children of God, and how wonderful that will be for the world. Now, before we go on, we should note that the previous beatitude is very significant here. In verse 8, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." And peacemaking can only really be done by the pure in heart, because you've got to be impartial. If you're going to be a peacemaker, that's necessary to be effective. And so being a peacemaker follows on from having that attitude of purity of heart. You might want to look at last week's episode to be filled in on that. Let's talk about two things regarding this. First of all, what does it mean in the context of the gospel, of the teachings of the New Testament, to be a peacemaker? Why is it important? Well, peacemakers are children of God because, as someone said, what peacemakers do, is to repeat what God has done. Ever since Genesis, ever since Eden, ever since what happened there, God has been a consistent peacemaker between himself and humankind through various people, starting in the earliest days, you could say, with Abraham, but even through to the New Testament times, God has been a passionate peacemaker between himself and God. So we are his children because we are doing what he does, like father, like son or daughter, you could say. And when we think about Jesus, one of his key characteristics was that he was a peacemaker. He was prophesied to be such. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, he's called the Prince of Peace, isn't he? If Jesus is fundamentally a peacemaker, then all people who follow him are, and all preachers and teachers are, fundamentally peacemakers. Indeed, to take it further, Christ is our peace. In Ephesians chapter 2, verse 14, he himself is our peace, making both groups into one, breaking down the barrier or the dividing wall of hostility. He is our peace. We're entering into his peace as a peacemaker, then we join in that endeavour. Or Colossians chapter 1 and verse 20, through him, through Christ, he reconciled all things to himself, whether things on earth or things in the heavenlies, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. He made peace, and the cost was high. And that's something for us to bear in mind, which is this, that if Christ was willing to shed his blood to make peace, then it behoves us as preachers and teachers to put in the effort to be effective peacemakers in the way that we preach and teach and in what we preach and teach. If it cost Jesus that much, if it was worth that much to him, our ambition should be to be expert peacemakers. So that's the background to all of this. Now let's talk about what that means for you and I as a preacher or as a teacher. I would say this, first of all, a preacher or teacher who's fully invested in being a peacemaker, takes this to heart, will look for opportunities to reveal the God of peace in their preaching and teaching, to explain how we can be at peace with him, and to show how this peace we have through Christ with God, that peacemaking that's been done for us and we enjoy, how that inspires our discipleship, our own, and that hopefully those people we're speaking to. Because the fact that God is a peacemaker inspires our following of Christ. That's really important for us to take to heart. There's inspiration here. So how do we prepare? How does this affect our preparation in preaching and teaching? Well, first of all, I suppose it should be said, there's a question to be asked, which is there a lack of peace between you and anyone in your congregation? And if so, what can you do to improve the situation? Maybe you can't solve it all, but can you improve any areas of conflict that you have between you and anybody in your congregation? Romans chapter 12, verse 18 says, "If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. And there he's talking to people in a congregation. Perhaps it applies beyond that, but it must apply in the local community, congregational community. So as far as it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. That means we're not always able to be fully at peace with everyone, but we must do our best. Do you need to take initiative? It's important to process any irritations you are experiencing before you get up to speak. A peacemaker is one who removes irritations rather than causes them. So if you are irritated at something or someone, including even irritated with yourself, you will not be speaking from a position of peace, and will therefore find it hard to preach as a peacemaker. So sort that out in prayer and conversations with a safe person before you speak. If you are irritated, if you've got something going on in your life, just find someone to speak to, take some time in prayer so that you're not caught up in that irritation when you arrive at the gathering where you're going to be speaking. But sometimes also that irritation can happen during a church service. Let's face it, I've been there. Somebody's said something, a song has been sung in a certain way, or perhaps you don't even like that song, and it irritates you. And that happens to me from time to time. Maybe it happens to you. You've got to do your best to process that in the moment and surrender it to God. Because if you get up to speak, to preach and teach when you're really entangled and enmeshed in your irritation, you're going to find it really hard to be a preaching peacemaker. So if it happens during the service, pray and ask God for help. There have been times, I'll say this, not recently, but there have been times in the past where I was so tense about something that was irritating me. I left the church service, prayed, and came back. I went out to the car park, took a few deep breaths of fresh air, talked to God about why I was irritated, and went back in. You might think, well, that's not right. You shouldn't leave a church service. Well, I don't know exactly what's right and wrong, but I knew that I wasn't in a good place to get up and speak. I'd be speaking out of my irritation. That's not going to help anybody. So that's what I did. Maybe you don't need to do that, but maybe you need to do something. If you find yourself tense and irritated, do something about it before you get up and speak. What do you do? Perhaps you have a process that works for you. I'd like to know what it is. The other thing we want to ask about here is, what is there in our lesson that will promote peace between human beings and God and between people? Have a look at your lesson. Are you promoting peace? Are you being a peacemaker? And then in the presentation phase, if you like, as opposed to preparation, it must be said, there is a place for preaching and teaching that disturbs people. Jesus did it. In Jeremiah chapter 6, verse 14, the warning is there. They dress the wounds of my people as though they were not serious. Peace, peace, they say when there is no peace. We're not trying to say all the time it should be calm waters when we're preaching and teaching. There are times and places for people being disturbed by the teachings of God. However, when this is warranted, do your best to make sure that it is the word doing the disturbing rather than you. In other words, preaching with a scowl on your face is, I'm suggesting that's not the best approach. Let God do the convicting and disturbing through his word by the truth of it, rather than how much volume you have, or the tension and the grittiness of your voice, or the desperately furious look on your face. I would suggest that's not the best way to approach it, because then it's really about us more than about the word of God. Not to say that what we preach and teach shouldn't affect our demeanor, our tone, and our face. It should. It's just that it shouldn't be that that becomes the focus and what people remember. I remember he looked really upset. No, what does the Bible say is actually the key here. And another thing we want to consider is this. As you get more experience as a preacher or a teacher, I pray and hope that you'll become better at discerning, and you'll develop a discernment as to when God might be saying, whilst you're in the act of preaching or teaching, when God is saying, hold back. On occasion, I feel ready to say something especially challenging. And when it's right to do so, now I know when it's right. I can't put it any better than to say, I have a feeling. There's a gut thing going on that I sense is God helping me with discernment to know, you know what, it is time to say that challenging thing, or it is time to say that more challenging thing than you were planning to say. The Spirit is moving in some way, and prompting me to say something that I know will be disturbing in some way. And I think I now know when that is going on. I also know now when it's not the right time. And I have a sense it's not the right time, at least when I'm paying attention to what's going on in me. I do know. This is hard to explain, and this will be different for everybody, each person. But I know it's not the right time. Here's what happens when it's not the right time. I've got a point I'm making. I think I can make this more firmly or with a bit more strength, maybe a bit more challenging, perhaps a bit more disturbing. And I think I might say this. And then when it's right, it just is right. When it's not right, I tell you what happens is it's some kind of burning feeling is what I feel in my head. It's like I'm having some kind of a flush. And I get this burning sensation in the back of my head and sometimes in my face. And at times I've ignored it and thought, no, I need to say this. And I say it, and then I regret I said it because I know it was out of irritation and frustration in myself rather than being something from God that was going to be helpful for the people listening. So now, most of the time, when I get that feeling, which doesn't come very often, I pay attention to it and I don't say what I was thinking of saying, even though it feels like it might be really satisfying to say it. Do you have a sense of that? I expect it's different to mine, but do you have a sense of when you need to do the right thing would be to hold back? The last thing I would say is that if you are delivering a challenging message, which we need from time to time, just watch your tone. A loving tone is possible even when making a challenging point. There are many benefits for us and our hearers when we preach and teach as peacemakers. Firstly, in promoting peace, we inspire people to live in that peace and call others into that peace. Secondly, we reveal the heart of Christ, the peacemaker, to our hearers. And thirdly, we inspire and motivate our hearers to Christ likeness in this particular area. And let's face it, the world needs more peacemakers right now, in the church and outside. Well, next week we'll go on to the 8th Beatitude. But for today, I'd like to know what you think about this one. How can we preach and teach in a way that's informed by this wonderful 7th Beatitude? Let me know what you think. What kinds of questions does this bring to your mind regarding preaching and teaching? Why not pray over the Beatitudes, asking God to reveal how they can flavor your speaking? And if God reveals anything to you, please drop me a line. You can add your comments on this week's topic. Leave your comment publicly where we can all read it because we learn best when we're learning in community. If you got a question or a thought you want to message me directly about, then send me an email to malcolm@malcolmcox.org. If you'd like a free copy of my ebook on spiritual disciplines, then sign up for my newsletter at the website, malcolmcox.org. If you know anybody that might benefit from this, please pass the link on, subscribe, hit the notification button, leave a review. Why not? And until the next time, keep calm and carry on teaching. Take care and God bless.